Welcome back to Things You Don't Know. Today we're going to expand our conversation about Cinco de Mayo, a holiday that many people know by name, but is often really very misunderstood, right, Dr. Deneen?
It certainly is. A lot of people associate Cinco de Mayo with parties, Mexican food, music, and drinks, especially in the United States. And celebration is definitely a part of how the holiday is observed today.
The heart of Cinco de Mayo is historical. It commemorates the Battle of Puebla, fought on May 5th, 1862.
A couple of days ago, huh?
Yeah, it's been a minute back. That was when Mexican forces defeated the French army.
Whoa, that's a big deal. That victory became a very powerful symbol of Mexican resistance and national pride. It wasn't Mexico's Independence Day. No, 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 no. That day is September the 16th. That is Mexican Independence Day. But it became a nationalist remembrance of a smaller, less equipped Mexican army defeating one of the strongest military powers in the world.
It's very important also to talk about just who was fighting. The Mexican army of Puebla included many ordinary soldiers, including indigenous and mestizo mixed troops. In Mexican national memory, this victory is often remembered as a triumph of the Mexican people, including indigenous communities, against European imperial power.
And that European power is France, led by Napoleon III. And while people sometimes say the Mexicans defeated an Austrian general, the main French commander at the Battle of Puebla was actually Charles de Lorraine, a French general.
The Austrian connection comes a little later. After France continued its invasion, Napoleon III installed Maximilian de Habsburg, an Austrian archduke, as emperor of Mexico.
So the larger conflict was definitely tied to European intervention and empire. Cinco de Mayo remembers the moment when Mexican forces stood their ground, united against that intervention, and won.
I want to turn our attention now to the historical background of Cinco de Mayo. Now, to understand why the battle happened here, we have to look at Mexico in the mid 1800s. Now, Mexico had been through years of conflict, including the Mexican American War and their internal civil war.
Yeah, by the early 1860s, Mexico was deeply in debt. President Benito Juarez, who was himself indigenous Zapotic from Osaka, announced that Mexico would temporarily stop paying some foreign debts.
Now that angered several European powers. Britain, Spain, and France sent armed forces to Mexico. Britain and Spain eventually negotiated and withdrew, but France stayed.
Well, France, Dr. Deneen, had bigger ambitions. Napoleon III wanted to expand French influence in the Americas and establish a monarchy in Mexico. This was happening while the United States was distracted by the Civil War.
Yes, indeed. So the French army marched inland towards Mexico City. They expected a relatively easy campaign. French troops were experienced, well equipped, and pretty dang confident.
But standing in their way near Puebla was General Ignacio Zaragoza, leading a Mexican force that was smaller and less well supplied.
And General Zaragoza's army included regular soldiers, local fighters, and men from different regions and backgrounds. They used the terrain around Puebla to their advantage and defended fortified positions.
Hmm. That is such a big military principle. Fortified positions. On May the 5th, 1862, the French attacked, but the Mexican forces held firm. The French suffered heavy losses and they were forced to retreat.
That victory shocked many observers. It didn't end the war, but it gave Mexico an enormous symbolic victory.
And General Zaragoza famously reported the outcome with a simple message: the national arms have been covered with glory.
Yeah. So Cinco de Mayo becomes meaningful because it represented more than a military win. It became a story about national dignity.
Exactly, Dr. Weaver. Mexico was not as wealthy or nearly as heavily armed as France. It had recently endured its own war, political division, and severe economic crisis. Yet at Puebla, Mexican fighters defeated an imperial army that outnumbered it 5-1.
And that really does matter in a nationalist sense because the holiday tells a story of Mexico defending itself against outside domination.
And there's another important layer here. President Benito Juarez was indigenous Zapotec, and many in Mexico's armies came from indigenous, mestizo, and rural communities.
So, in cultural memory, Cinco de Mayo is often framed as a people's victory, not just generals and politicians, but ordinary Mexicans resisting the might of the European Empire.
The phrase indigenous people defeated an Austrian general needs a little correction, but the spirit behind it points to something real. Indigenous and mestizo Mexicans played a major role in defending the Republic, and Mexico's struggle was against European imperial ambitions.
The Austrian figure, Maximilian, became emperor, in a sense, in words, after the French invasion succeeded temporarily. But he was eventually overthrown, captured, and executed in 1867 after Mexican Republican forces regained control of the country.
That final victory restored the Republic under Juarez. So Cinco de Mayo sits inside a larger national story: Mexico resisting foreign rule and defending its Republican sovereignty. That final victory restored the Republic under Juarez. So Cinco de Mayo sits inside a larger national story: Mexico resisting foreign rule and defending its Republican sovereignty.
Now let's talk about celebrations and traditions. In Mexico, Cinco de Mayo is not celebrated everywhere with the same intensity.
Yeah, the biggest celebrations are in Puebla, where the battle took place. There, the day can include civic ceremonies, parades, speeches, music, and historical reenactments.
One of the most recognizable traditions is the reenactment of the Battle of Puebla. Participants dress as Mexican and French soldiers and recreate scenes from the conflict.
There are also military parades, school programs, public events, and patriotic displays. Mexican flags are common, and the tone is often civic and historical rather than just purely festive.
In Puebla, the holiday connects local pride with national memory. It's a day when the city's role in Mexican history is placed first, front, and center.
There can also be fairs, concerts, dancing, and food vendors, depending on the community. But it's not exactly the same as Mexican Independence Day, which is much more widely celebrated across the country.
Now let's talk about music and dance. Music is a big part of many Mexican and Mexican American celebrations, and Cinco de Mayo events often include traditional and popular styles.
Yeah, you might hear mariachi, which is probably one of the best known Mexican musical traditions internationally. Mariachi groups often perform patriotic songs or rancheras and festive music.
One famous patriotic song is Mexico Lindo Querido. It isn't specific only to Cinco de Mayo, but it's often associated with Mexican pride and identity.
Another song people may recognize is La Bamba, which comes from the San Jiraco tradition of Veracruz. Again, not specifically a Cinco de Mayo song, but often part of Mexican cultural celebrations.
Traditional dances may also appear at community events. One common example is Jare Patricio, often called the Mexican hat dance. It became associated with Mexican national identity and is frequently performed in kind of a folkloric sort of setting.
Folcloricio dance groups are also common at Cinco de Mayo festivals, especially in the United States. These performances may include dances from Jalisco, Veracruz, Puebla, Osaka, and other regions.
And that regional diversity matters. Mexican culture isn't just one single thing. The music and dances of northern Mexico, central Mexico, coastal regions, and indigenous communities can be very different.
Yes. So when people celebrate with music and dance, the best approach is to recognize that these traditions have specific places and histories. They're not just decorations for a party.
Food is another major part of Cinco de Mayo celebrations, especially in Mexican American communities.
Absolutely. In Puebla, one dish that often comes up is mole poblano. Puebla is famous for mole, a rich sauce that can include chilies, spices, nuts, seeds, and sometimes chocolate. See our podcast on that.
Mole poblano is often served with turkey or chicken. It's a celebratory dish because it takes time, skill, and a whole bevy of ingredients to prepare.
Another Puebla associated dish is chiles and noganda, although it is more strongly tied to Mexican independence celebrations because its colors resemble the Mexican flag, green, white, and red.
For Cinco de Mayo events, especially in the U.S., people often serve tacos, tamales, enchiladas, zole, tostadas, guacamole, salsas, and rice and beans.
Those foods can absolutely be part of a celebration, but it's worth remembering that they come from different regions and traditions. Mexican food is really quite varied.
For example, tamales have deep indigenous roots and are made in many different styles across Mexico and Latin America. Some are filled with pork or chicken, others with beans, cheese, chiles, or even sweet fillings.
Zole, a hominy-based stew, often has indigenous origins and is often served at major gatherings and celebrations.
And in Puebla, specifically, you might also find foods like simitas, which are Puebloan sandwiches, or chalupa pobladas.
So if someone wants to build a Cinco de Mayo menu with a historical connection, Puebla is a good place to start. Mole poblano, simitas, chalupas, and other regional foods.
Cinco de Mayo is actually more widely celebrated in the United States than much of Mexico. Isn't that interesting, Dr. Weaver?
Yeah, it really is. I found that to be a discovery when when we were investigating doing
Same
this.
here.
Mexican communities in places like California began celebrating the Battle of Puebla soon after it happened. For Mexican Americans in the 19th century, the victory represented resistance to European imperialism and support for Mexican sovereignty and pride.
Later, during the Chicano movement of the 1960s and 1970s, Cinco de Mayo became connected to Mexican American pride, cultural identity, and civil rights activism.
Then, in the late 20th century, the holiday became heavily commercialized. Beer companies, restaurants, and advertisers promoted Cinco de Mayo as a party holiday.
The commercialization is why many Americans recognize the holiday, but may not know its history at all.
Still, Cinco de Mayo celebrations in the United States can be meaningful. Many communities hold festivals with folclore dancing, mariachi music, art, food, parades, and educational events.
Absolutely. At their best, these celebrations honor Mexican and Mexican American culture rather than reducing it to stereotypes.
So, how can you celebrate respectfully?
First, it's important to know the history. Cinco de Mayo, as we said, commemorates the Battle of Puebla and the Mexican resistance to imperial French intervention.
Absolutely. Now, second, avoid stereotypes. Sombreros, fake mustaches, fake accents, and costumes that turn Mexican identity into a joke. They're not appreciation, it's really a form of disrespect.
Third, support Mexican and Mexican American communities. That might mean eating at Mexican owned restaurants, attending cultural events, buying from Mexican artists, or learning from community organizations.
Fourth, you should recognize diversity. Mexican culture includes indigenous, Spanish, African, Asian, Middle Eastern, and other influences. It is regional, complex, and alive.
And finally, remember that celebration and education, they can go together. They can go hand in hand. You can enjoy music and food while also understanding what the day commemorates. And that's pretty fun, I have to say.
Indeed. So, to bring it all together, Cinco de Mayo marks the Mexican victory at the Battle of Puebla on May 5th, 1862.
While it is not Mexican Independence Day, it is a powerful nationalist remembrance. A story, as we said, of Mexico defending itself against European imperial power.
The Mexican forces at Puebla included ordinary soldiers, indigenous and mestizo fighters, and local defenders who helped turn an unlikely battle into a lasting symbol of resistance.
And while France later occupied Mexico and installed Maximilian of Habsburg an Austrian archduke, Mexico eventually defeated that imperial project and restored its republic.
Today, Cinco de Mayo can include parades, reenactments, mariachi music, folklore dancing, patriotic songs, and foods associated with Puebla and with broader Mexican traditions.
But the deeper meaning here is courage, sovereignty, and cultural pride.
So, this Cinco de Mayo, enjoy the food. Yeah. Enjoy the music. Yeah. Kind of get into the groove, get your body moving a little bit. Enjoy the celebration, but remember the story.
A small Mexican army defeated a powerful European
And
force.
that victory became a symbol of a nation refusing to be ruled from abroad.
And that is something that we should be remembering today, particularly,
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
things, people saying, well, maybe we should take over Mexico. No, I don't think that's a good idea.
I don't either, Dr. Weaver.
Yeah. So thanks for listening to Things You Don't Know as we took a nice little dive into Cinco de Mayo victory, memory, and celebration. So until next time, I say goodbye for Dr. Deneen and Chandler Foster. Come on back soon.